Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Damon Nagame, and I'm a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council and director of NRDC's Southern California Ecosystems Project. I want to first talk about our view of desalination projects generally, and then I'll talk briefly about the potential impacts of desalination projects on marine protected areas here in California, and then my other colleagues will speak to other issues. First, NRDC, as you can see on the slide, is part of a broad coalition of conservation, coastal protection, and social justice groups that has long been engaged in the discussion regarding the role that seawater desalination should play in the state's efforts to tackle the serious problem of long-term drought in California. I should first note that California's top priority for drought relief ought to be securing affordable, cost-effective, resilient, and environmentally sound alternatives that we know will work, such as conservation, efficiency, stormwater capture, and recycling. NRDC is not categorically against desalination. As a last resort, where it's needed and where it's done right, and in accordance with state water board policy, we are open to desalination as one element of a well-planned local or regional water supply portfolio. NRDC and several of our colleague organizations laid out these basic principles in 2 issue briefs entitled Proceed with Caution, California's Drought and Seawater Desalination, which are available on our website. In those briefs, we explain that desal can be an expensive, energy-intensive, and environmentally risky water supply option and may not be the best use of scarce water funds, especially in regions where water sustainability remains a distant aspiration. My second point today is that it's critical when discussing seawater desalination that we pay special attention to the potential impacts projects could have on our landmark network of marine protected areas here in California. As many of you know, in 1999, NRDC sponsored and California passed the groundbreaking Marine Life Protection Act, the first American ocean protection law of its kind. The state then undertook a comprehensive 13-year process to implement the law, and through 4 regional stakeholder-driven processes, 124 marine protected areas were designated in state waters from Northern California to the Mexican border. Importantly, this has been a top priority for NRDC and for other groups, and has required a huge investment of time and resources on the part of the state. California's MPA system, which is regarded as a model for other efforts around the world, is designed to function as a network. This means that MPAs are designed to allow biological exchange between MPAs. And we know that this connectivity is essential to maintaining healthy ecosystems and marine communities. This also means that degradation of a single MPA or disruption of the network could have effects that reach beyond the site of impact. So we need to make sure safeguards are in place to protect MPAs and the MPA network from the impacts of desalination projects, for example, when considering the placing of intakes and brine discharge. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Joe Giebert.
Commissioners, my name is Joe Giebert, and I'm with Residents for Responsible Desalination. I have a really brief historical perspective on seawater intakes. But first, this topic is personally and professionally important to me. In 1970, I quit high school and began working as a commercial fisherman. Later in life, I got an economics degree and law degree, hoping to work on coastal and ocean resource protection. Over the course of my life, I've watched as marine life populations have shrunk from abundance to scarcity despite laws to protect these precious resources. In '72, the Clean Water Act was passed with provisions to regulate seawater intakes, but it only applied to intakes for cooling industrial facilities. Excuse me. California also passed the Porter Cologne Act in '74, which included similar provisions for all industrial uses of seawater, not just cooling. That bill also included Coastal Act policies, so you'll find language in the Coastal Act about minimizing entrainment. Both the Clean Water Act and Porter Cologne Act mandate the use of best technology available to minimize the intake and mortality of marine life. But California law only regulates new facilities. Oh, there's a slide with this language on it.
Keep going.
Oh. It only regulates new facilities, and so that means that for desal intakes, the best available technology is only required when the facility is built. So government only gets one bite at the apple for ensuring protection of marine life for desal facilities that will operate indefinitely. It took decades to get EPA and California State Water Board to adopt regulations to implement these laws. But by 2000, we had prevailed in litigation against EPA, and we were certain they would prohibit seawater withdrawals through what they call once-through cooling. But also in 2000, desal project proponents started talking about using the once-through cooling discharge for the desal intake. It took until 2010 to finally get regulations phasing out those ocean intakes for power plants in California, which is happening right now. And in 2015, the State Board finally adopted regulations defining the best available technology for desal facilities. For desal, subsurface intakes are now defined as the best technology to minimize intake and mortality. There are exceptions to that rule in extreme cases, but none of the current project proposals have shown they are eligible for the exception. It's a high hurdle to ensure the exceptions don't swallow the rule. There are about 6 or 7 active desal proposals in California right now. 2 of them are proposing to use subsurface intakes, and the others are still trying to co-locate with power plants or other open ocean intakes, despite the fact the power plant's open intakes are now outlawed. Those project proponents raise all sorts of arguments about why the regulations shouldn't apply to them. And if you've been around for a while, you know they are repeating arguments that were rejected when the laws were passed and rejected again when the regulations were adopted. There is no significance threshold, no benefit cost analysis, and no quote-unquote second best technology. They're trying to convince the public to pressure regulators to ignore the law. Don't let them. The laws and regulations don't prohibit seawater desalination, and project proponents would find a fairly easy path to approval if they just followed the rules. When I was a young fisherman, old-timers told us tales of fish abundance we couldn't believe. And now, I hate to say, I'm telling younger fishermen tales of abundance they don't believe. You can't imagine how depleted the ocean looks compared to what we enjoyed just a few decades ago. But nature is resilient. We can restore the abundance I knew as a young commercial fisherman, but not if we keep making exceptions to the rules. We're confident your staff can work cooperatively with the regional boards to ensure full compliance with the regs. But staff can only do so much. They need your full support. We hope you'll ensure full compliance and take a step towards restoring past abundance for our kids and grandkids. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ray Heimstra, and I'm with Orange County Coastkeeper. I'm going to go over a few things that you from the staff report, and then also some new things. First, I'd like to start with open ocean intakes. As was mentioned, this is obsolete technology. There is, however, a provision where if it's necessary to use this, wedge wire screens can be used. It's very important to note that wedge wire screens were found to be only 1% effective by the State Water Board panel. So, especially since most of the marine life is very small, those screens don't do much. Also, using screens instead of a subsurface intakes requires tons of chemicals, resulting in a lot more discharge of chemicals to the ocean. Next thing is brine discharge. Again, options. The ideal situation is to go ahead and commingle the brine with existing wastewater outfalls so that we don't have a new pollution source, a new brine plume. If you need to use a discharge another way, though, there's a diffuser option. However, the diffusers themselves also cause mortality to marine life. And in fact, the State Lands Commission study just showed that it was 100% of the dilution area that was destroyed by the diffuser. So they have significant impacts to marine life. If there's one slide you look at today, I would ask you to look at this one. Because up at the top of this slide, this little triangle, that is the amount that we mitigate for when we do our calculations. So if you say there's a screen or a diffuser that's causing problems, all that stuff below that red triangle are the things we miss in our nets and in our calculations and things like that. So that the actual thing is much bigger than you see. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as I can. My name is Mandy Sackett, California Policy Coordinator for the Surfrider Foundation. Good morning, Commissioners. Surfrider has long argued that seawater desalination should be considered an absolute last resort as a source of water supply. One of the most significant drawbacks to seawater desalination is the siting of major infrastructure directly on our coast. Such development perpetuates the industrialization of our coast, and many of the proposed locations are in danger of flooding in the near future due to sea level rise, and are therefore in direct conflict with the state's climate change and adaptation policies. In this photo, you can see the toll that recent December 3rd king tides had on Imperial Beach, the complete disappearance of the beach. Sea level rise has to be taken seriously today. Under Coastal Act Sections 30210, 30211, 30220, 30221, and 30213, the public shall be afforded maximum access to walk along the beach and for the enjoyment and recreation of public trust resources. Citing major infrastructure, including desalination plants in flood zones, directly violates these sections of the Coastal Act and the Public Trust Doctrine. As the mean high tide line migrates landward due to sea level rise, such structures will seek to rely on coastal armoring. Once armoring is in place, the beach and coastal access is inevitably lost. Therefore, any encouragement of coastal development and fortification in a sea level rise flood zone is not consistent with the policies of the Coastal Act. The Commission's own sea level rise guidance provides explicit instruction for siting new development that future permits and plans should limit new development in hazardous areas. And furthermore, local governments should apply high sea level rise projections for siting and design of critical infrastructure. Major infrastructure should not be permitted without a local vulnerability plan assessment and must be part of a local and regional climate change adaptation plan. The Ocean Protection Council is currently updating their sea level rise guidance document with the latest science and policy recommendations, and it includes the recommendation for considering what's known as the H++ scenario, which is based on recent models showing that rising seas of 10 to 50 feet or more could happen by 2100 due to increased ice melting in the Antarctic. For high consequence projects, the OPC guidance states that the H++ scenario should be included in planning and adaptation strategies. So we hope you'll keep this in mind when considering new desalination plants, and we've included a list of sources of informational items in your package today, so we hope you'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Connor Everett, followed by Marcy and Therese Culler, and then followed by Kathy Biala.
Thank you very much. My name is Connor Everett, representing the Desal Response Group. Like Joe Gieber, I've been working on this issue for way too long. I actually grew up taking the bus and often riding my bicycle to Santa Monica Pier to fish, and I can attest that fishing isn't what it used to be. I think the issue around desal, since I've worked on it since the late 80s, when in the midst of a drought, agencies put in standby plants in Catalina and Santa Barbara that then sat idle into our next crisis, is really one of need. We've seen cities of Los Angeles, which had its own power plant and could charge itself what it needed to, a very low rate, to actually make desal feasible, put it out of their plans for the next 30 years while they do everything else first. One of those primary things is the amount of recycled water at a high cost, embedded with energy that we still dump in the Southern California Bight. Until we've completed that, we haven't made full use of not wasting wastewater and providing the opportunities. Not only did I sit in the state desal panel in 2005, I believe, I was also recently on a direct potable reuse. We are moving towards that. However, if we divert resources and attention to what we need to do first and we get stuck on desal, it's unfortunate. I appreciate staff and the efforts the Coastal Commission has done to understand our freshwater challenges and our drinking water challenges. I don't think the water agencies fully understand their impact on the marine environment as well. So I appreciate this opportunity. I actually have to go and work with communities, environmental justice communities we work with, for drinking water quality, because while the issue has been made that somehow ocean desalination would be available to them, it is not. So agencies that I work with in towns like Maywood and Paramount, we're looking to find funding so they can figure out their solutions locally. And once again, I hope we get to the point where community-based organizations did as they did in the late 90s, early 2000s, where in LA they were responsible for 1.5 million ultra-low flow toilets, which provided economic development for the community-based organizations and saved long-term water. Those are the kinds of solutions we need, not this continued talk with very few implementation projects. The other ones that were looked at were Marin, Santa Cruz, that voted it down and then became very efficient for the drought. We've had a couple of missteps. Cambria is a good example. But we often talk about the proposals that are out there. We should look at the ones that we no longer look at. And I don't think it's necessarily because of our success challenging them, but they just don't make sense. And lastly, I'm going to give someone who's handicapped a ride, who actually took the train and then Ubered over here, spent about $50, wanted to speak on an earlier item, but isn't able to stay, so I'll give her a ride back out. But I do appreciate this time. Thank you very much.
Next, we'll have Mars Gutierrez Gravens.
Hello? Okay. Hi, my name is Marcela Gutierrez Graudich, and I'm the founder and director of Azul. I'm also here speaking for our colleagues at Oakview Comunidad, which is a social justice organization based in Huntington Beach, in the Huntington Beach Oakview neighborhood that could not be here. Today, we're here to express our concerns and urge caution when considering desalination plants. We fear these could try to profit by privatizing a public resource. Desalination is in general a bad deal for ratepayers, and its high cost and outsized energy use will hit low-income communities and communities of color the hardest. We have many examples of the problems that come with privatizing or monopolizing water supply infrastructure, and that's never to the benefit of taxpayers or ratepayers. Access to clean, safe, reliable, and affordable water is a basic human right and one affirmed by California state law. We appreciate that state and local officials take this mandate seriously, and we applaud the progress that has been made to date in water conservation, efficiency, and recycling. All the facts indicate, and all this progress indicates, that we simply still don't need desalination until we exhaust all of these options. Many of our constituents actually are already suffering from poor air quality and climate impacts like heat islands, so we're particularly concerned about the high energy cost of desalination. It is by far the most energy-intensive option, using about 3 times as much energy as recycling. All of that energy has to come from somewhere. Empowering these huge plants will undermine much of the climate progress California has already made, fueling more drought in the long term. Furthermore, many possible locations are vulnerable to floods from rising seas as well as earthquakes and tsunamis. So we're calling on you to keep in mind environmental and economic justice concerns as you consider desalination, and urge you to focus on water efficiency, recycling, and stormwater projects that can meet our future water needs without compromising the health or economic well-being of our members. Gracias.
Thank you.